The emergency klaxons screamed through the halls of the Galactic High Command like wounded animals. In the Grand Assembly Chamber, 12 of the most powerful beings in known space sat frozen around their obsidian table, staring at the holographic display that showed their worst nightmare come to life. "Tell me this is some kind of sick joke," hissed Supreme Admiral Vex Thora, her 6 eyes blinking in rapid succession. Her serpentine form coiled tighter around her command chair as she watched human warships tear through their outer defenses. "Tell me that pathetic, bottom-feeding species did not just obliterate our entire Third Fleet." General Krexvor's mandibles clicked nervously as he manipulated the tactical display. The insectoid warrior had conquered 17 star systems, but right now? Right now he looked like he was about to wet himself. "The reports are confirmed, Supreme Admiral. Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane of the Human Expeditionary Force has destroyed 67 of our capital ships in the last 48 hours. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Admiral Zul Nex, whose crystalline body usually glowed with confidence, had dimmed to barely visible. "Kane? Marcus Kane? Are you absolutely certain we are talking about the same miserable excuse for a sentient being?" The very same, wheezed Defense Minister Lothar through his breathing apparatus. The ancient amphibian pulled up Kane's military file, and the chamber fell silent. Marcus Kane, age 34, Earth Standard, height 1.8 meters, weight 82 kilograms, species designation human. Draft status, he paused, his throat sacs pulsing with what could only be described as embarrassment. Rejected by all 12 member species as, quote, militarily incompetent, unquote. "Oh, this is rich." General Morkes burst into what passed for laughter among his people, a sound like grinding metal. The same Kane who scored dead last in tactical assessments? The one every single one of us passed on during the draft because he was too stupid to follow basic military protocol? Supreme Admiral Vex Thora's tail lashed violently against her chair. "Do not remind me. I personally reviewed his application. The fool suggested using, quote, unconventional maneuvers, unquote, during his interview. Unconventional. Hey, I thought he meant he did not understand proper formation flying. His psychological profile was even worse," added Intelligence Director Yex Kane, her multiple arms gesturing frantically at the data streams. Quote, "Lacks respect for authority, shows dangerous levels of creativity, refuses to follow established combat doctrine, displays reckless disregard for conventional wisdom," unquote. We all agreed he was a liability. Admiral Zul Nex's glow flickered with what might have been panic. And now this liability is commanding the most terrifying fleet any of us have ever encountered. How is this possible? How does a reject become fleet admiral of an entire species in just 3 years? "Because humans are insane," roared War Chief Bex Goal, slamming his massive fist on the table hard enough to crack the surface. "They gave their highest military position to someone we deemed unfit for basic grunt work. What kind of species promotes failure?" General Krexvor pulled up another display, his compound eyes reflecting the red warning lights that bathed the chamber. "According to our intelligence, Kane's rise was meteoric. He went from commanding a single frigate to leading Earth's entire military in under 2 years, and his track record shows impossible victories." "Impossible how?" demanded Vex Thora. "He wins battles he should lose. Every time. Against superior numbers, better technology, more experienced commanders. The human somehow turns certain defeat into devastating victory. Our analysts have gone over his engagements dozens of times, and none of it makes tactical sense." The Defense Minister Lothar's breathing apparatus wheezed louder as his stress levels spiked. "The Battle of Proxima Relay. Kane's 3 ships against our 12. He should have surrendered or died. Instead, he lured our fleet into the asteroid field and used the gravity wells to. He trailed off, unable to finish. To turn our own momentum against us, completed Intelligence Director Yex Kane quietly. 11 capital ships destroyed. His losses? 0. The siege of Kepler Station was worse, added General Morkes, his metallic voice dropping to an almost whisper. 57 ships under Admiral QX-4's command. Kane had 19 aging human vessels. The battle lasted 8 minutes. 8. When the smoke cleared, QX-4 was dead, his entire fleet was scrap metal, and Kane was broadcasting surrender demands across 17 systems. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer as human forces pushed deeper into their territory. Finally, Supreme Admiral Vex Thora spoke, her voice barely controlled. "So let me understand this correctly. The human we all rejected for being too incompetent to serve in our military has now become the single greatest threat to galactic stability in recorded history." War Chief Vex Ghoul nodded grimly. "That about sums it up, yes." Vex Thora's laugh was sharp, bitter, and completely devoid of humor. Outstanding. Just outstanding. 3 years earlier, the same chamber had buzzed with excitement and anticipation. The annual Galactic Military Draft was the social event of the millennium, where the 12-member species selected the finest military minds from across known space. Back then, the obsidian table had gleamed under celebration lights, not the harsh emergency illumination that bathed it now. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora remembered that day with perfect, agonizing clarity. She had been so confident, so sure of her species' superior judgment. How laughably wrong they had all been. "Bring in the next candidate," she had announced that day, her voice ringing with authority. The doors had hissed open, and in walked Marcus Kane. Even now, 3 years later, she could recall every detail of that moment. The human had been unremarkable in every way: average height, average build, wearing a standard Earth military uniform that looked like it had been pressed by someone who did not quite understand how pressing worked. Kane had stood at attention, but not the rigid, proper attention they expected. No, he had stood casually, comfortably, like he was waiting for a bus rather than facing the most powerful military minds in the galaxy. His dark eyes had swept the room, taking in each species representative with what could only be described as mild curiosity. "State your name and qualifications," General Krex-4 had commanded, his mandibles clicking with official importance. Marcus Kane, Fleet Commander, Earth Defense Force, graduated top of my class from Luna Academy, specialized in adaptive tactical response and resource optimization. The human's voice had been steady, unremarkable, completely ordinary. Admiral Zul next had been the first to question him, her crystalline form pulsing with scholarly interest. "Commander Kane, you list here that your primary tactical philosophy is, quote, flexibility over doctrine, unquote. Can you elaborate?" Kane had actually smiled. During a formal military interview, "Sure. I believe rigid doctrine is a luxury you can only afford when fighting predictable enemies. Since no enemy worth fighting is predictable, doctrine becomes a crutch that cripples creative response." The silence that followed had been deafening. War Chief Vex Ghoul had been the first to recover, his massive frame shaking with what they had all assumed was indignation. "You suggest abandoning proven military strategy in favor of improvisation?" "I suggest adapting proven strategy to unexpected circumstances. Most commanders spend so much time following the rulebook that they forget why the rules were written in the first place." Defense Minister Lokthar's breathing apparatus had wheezed loudly as he consulted his datapad. "Your service record shows multiple violations of direct orders. Care to explain?" Kane had shrugged. Actually shrugged. Orders are guidelines for achieving objectives. If following orders prevents achieving the objective, then following orders becomes counterproductive. "I prioritize mission success over procedural compliance." Intelligence Director Yex Kane had leaned forward, her multiple arms weaving complex gestures of disbelief. "During the Battle of Europa Station, you ignored direct commands from your superior officer and broke formation to pursue a flanking maneuver. Your actions resulted in court-martial proceedings. My actions also resulted in saving Europa Station and 3,000 civilian lives," Kane had replied calmly. The court-martial was dismissed when the results spoke for themselves. And sometimes you have to color outside the lines to create a masterpiece. General Morkes had consulted his files, his metallic voice dripping with disapproval. Your psychological evaluation indicates, quote, dangerous levels of independent thinking, unwillingness to accept established hierarchies, and troubling disregard for conventional wisdom, unquote. How do you respond to these concerns? Kane had actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle or diplomatic amusement, but genuine laughter. I respond by wondering if those are supposed to be criticisms or qualifications. Independent thinking solved more problems than group conformity ever did. Hierarchies exist to facilitate decision-making, not replace it. And conventional wisdom is just yesterday's breakthrough that people stopped questioning. That had been the moment. The exact moment when every single species representative had made the same decision. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora could still feel the collective shift in the room, the unanimous conclusion that this human was exactly what they did not want in their military forces. Thank you, Commander Kane, she had said with dismissive finality. We will be in touch. After Kane had left, the discussion had been brief and brutal. Completely unsuitable, Krexvor had declared. Shows no respect for proper command structure. Dangerously unpredictable, Zul Nex had added. Would undermine unit cohesion. A maverick who thinks rules do not apply to him, Bexgul had growled. Exactly the kind of loose cannon that destroys military effectiveness. One by one, each species had formally passed on Marcus Kane. The reptilian hegemony cited concerns about his disrespect for authority. The insectoid collective worried about his individualistic tendencies. The Silicon Confederacy found his adaptability philosophically unsound. The Aquatic Union questioned his ability to follow established protocols. 12 species. 12 rejections. Each one delivered with such confidence, such certainty that they were making the obvious, intelligent choice. Intelligence Director Yex Kane had delivered the final verdict, her official report stamping Kane's file with the designation that would haunt them forever: rejected, all species. Classification: expendable waste. Military value: negligible. Recommendation: return to species of origin for basic labor assignment. The file had been sealed and forgotten, filed away in the archives of rejected candidates. Just another human who did not measure up to galactic standards. Just another primitive mind that could not grasp the sophisticated nature of advanced military science. How spectacularly, catastrophically wrong they had all been. The rejection had been so complete, so unanimous, that the Galactic High Command had not even bothered monitoring what happened to Marcus Kane afterward. Why would they? He was expendable waste, military value negligible. What could possibly be worth watching? Admiral Zul Nex remembered receiving the first intelligence reports 6 months after the draft. Earth had established something called the Outcasts Division, a collection of rejected candidates from various human military academies. The reports had been filed under minor administrative updates and largely ignored. After all, what could a bunch of rejects accomplish? Kane had been assigned command of the division, not because Earth's leadership recognized his genius, but because nobody else wanted the job. The Outcasts Division was where careers went to die, where the military dumped its misfits and troublemakers. It was Earth's equivalent of a penal colony, just with better uniforms and lower expectations. Intelligence Director Yex Kane had been the first to notice something odd in the subsequent reports. The Human Reject Unit has engaged in several minor skirmishes with pirate vessels in the Outer Rim territories, she had reported to the Council during a routine briefing. Their success rate is unusual. Define unusual, Supreme Admiral Vex Thora had replied, barely looking up from more pressing matters. 100% mission success, 0 casualties, complete destruction of enemy forces in every engagement. That had gotten some attention, but not much. Pirates were hardly military threats. Any competent force should be able to handle raiders and smugglers. The fact that Kane's rejects were successful simply meant they were not completely hopeless. The first real battle had been the asteroid belt incident. A group of separatist rebels had taken control of a mining station and declared independence from the Galactic Trade Federation. standard protocol called for a siege followed by overwhelming force assault. 3 alien military advisors had been dispatched to observe how Earth handled its first real military crisis. Kane had taken one look at the situation and done something that defied all logic. Instead of besieging the station, he had sent his ships directly into the asteroid field surrounding it. Not around it, not above it, through it. His vessels had weaved between the floating rocks like they were dancing, using the asteroids themselves as cover and concealment. "This is madness," the hegemony observer had reported back. "The human commander is flying his ships through a navigational nightmare. He will lose half his fleet to collision damage before he even reaches the station." But Kane had not lost a single ship. His pilots had followed his seemingly insane flight paths with precision that bordered on supernatural. They had emerged from the asteroid field like phantoms, appearing directly above the rebel station before anyone realized they were there. The battle had lasted exactly 4 minutes. No human casualties. Station captured intact. Rebels surrendering so fast they practically threw their weapons at Kane's feet. Lucky break, the alien advisors had concluded. The rebels were probably inexperienced and panicked when they saw ships coming through the field. Pure chance that the asteroids did not destroy the human fleet. The second engagement had been the freight lane ambush. A well-organized criminal syndicate had been preying on trade convoys for months. They had superior ships, better weapons, and detailed knowledge of convoy routes and schedules. Every previous attempt to stop them had failed because they always seemed to know when enforcement was coming. Kane had studied the pattern for exactly 12 hours before launching his counterstrike. But instead of trying to protect the convoys, he had done something completely different. He had disguised his warships as cargo haulers and sent them out as bait. When the criminals had attacked what they thought was an easy target, they had found themselves face-to-face with military-grade weaponry hidden inside fake merchant vessels. Another lucky break, the observers had reported. The criminals obviously did not do proper reconnaissance. Any competent raider would have seen through such an obvious deception. Except the deception had not been obvious. Kane's people had created false sensor signatures, fake cargo manifests, even staged communications between non-existent crew members. The disguise had been so perfect that even the alien observers had been fooled until Kane's ships had opened fire. By the end of his first year, Kane's Outcasts division had achieved a combat record that was starting to make people nervous. 37 engagements, 37 victories, 0 losses. The alien military establishment had begun paying closer attention, but their analysis remained unchanged. Kane was simply the beneficiary of an extraordinary run of good fortune. Statistical anomaly, General Krexvor had declared during one council session. No commander maintains perfect success indefinitely, but the law of averages will catch up with him eventually. The Battle of Titan's Gate had been the moment when luck stopped being a reasonable explanation. A rogue AI collective had seized control of an entire star system and was threatening to expand into nearby territories. 3 separate alien task forces had attempted to retake the system and failed. The AI's defenses were mathematically perfect, their responses calculated to counter every known tactical approach. Kane had arrived with his usual collection of misfits and rejects, taken one look at the situation, and promptly done something that violated every rule of military engagement. He had broadcast a surrender message. "We surrender unconditionally," he had announced on all frequencies. "We are requesting permission to land on your central command planet to discuss terms." The AI collective, programmed to accept surrenders efficiently, had granted permission. Kane's ships had approached the planet peacefully, landed at the designated coordinates, and then Kane had calmly walked out of his transport carrying a small device that the AI sensors had identified as a standard communication array. What the AI had not realized was that Kane's communication array was actually a virus delivery system designed by his own engineers. While the AI had been processing his surrender, Kane had uploaded a program that turned the collective's perfect mathematical responses against itself. Within 6 hours, the entire AI network had collapsed into recursive logic loops that rendered it completely harmless. Impossible. War Chief Beck's goal had raged when the reports came in. No one defeats a quantum AI collective with a software trick. The security protocols alone should have prevented any external program from executing. But Kane had not tried to break the security protocols. He had convinced the AI to voluntarily lower them by offering surrender. The virus had been disguised as standard diplomatic communication software, something the AI had been programmed to accept and process automatically. For the first time, the alien observers had used a different word in their reports. Instead of lucky, they had written concerning. Defense Minister Thar had summed up the growing unease perfectly. Either this human has more luck than any being in recorded history, or we are missing something very important about his capabilities. Intelligence Director Yex Kane had pulled up Kane's personnel file one more time, staring at the designation they had so confidently assigned, expendable waste. Military value, negligible. She had begun to suspect that their evaluation process might need some revision. The Galactic High Command had watched Kane's meteoric rise with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. In just 18 months, the human they had labeled expendable waste had gone from commanding a division of rejects to becoming the most feared military mind in human space. Admiral Zul Nex had been tasked with tracking Kane's promotions, and the timeline read like a fever dream. 6 months after the Titan's Gate incident, Kane had been promoted to Rear Admiral. 3 months later, Vice Admiral. Another 6 months, and he was Admiral of the Third Fleet. By the end of his second year, Marcus Kane held the rank of Fleet Admiral and commanded every human military asset in known space. How does a species promote someone that quickly? General Krex Vor had demanded during an emergency analysis session. Do humans not have any concept of proper command hierarchy? Intelligence Director Yex Kane had pulled up the human military records, her multiple arms gesturing frantically at the data streams. According to their files, Kane's promotion was based on, quote, unprecedented tactical innovation and unmatched strategic success, unquote. Apparently, human leadership noticed that every operation under his command achieved objectives with minimal casualties and maximum efficiency. Minimal casualties. War Chief Beck's goal had roared. The human has never lost a single soldier in any engagement. That is not minimal, that is impossible. But impossible was exactly what Kane kept delivering. The Battle of Proxima Junction had been the moment when alien military observers realized they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. A rebel faction had seized control of a crucial hyperspace junction, effectively cutting off 3 human colonies from supply lines. Standard military doctrine called for a prolonged siege to starve out the rebels, followed by a carefully coordinated assault. Kane had arrived with 47 ships and done something that violated every principle of space combat. He had ordered his entire fleet to shut down their engines and drift into the combat zone like derelict vessels. No power signatures, no active sensors, no communication arrays. To anyone watching, it looked like Kane's fleet had suffered catastrophic systems failure. The rebels, seeing what appeared to be helpless ships floating toward them, had moved in for easy kills. They had approached Kane's supposedly disabled vessels with the confidence of predators closing in on wounded prey. Only when they were within point-blank range had Kane's ships suddenly roared back to life, weapons charged and targeting systems locked. The battle had lasted exactly 93 seconds. 47 rebel ships destroyed, 0 human losses, hyperspace junction liberated. This makes no tactical sense. The Hegemony Observer had reported, his confusion evident in every word. How did Kane's ships maintain weapons readiness while appearing completely disabled? How did his crews coordinate a simultaneous restart of all systems without any detectable communication? The answer, when it finally emerged, had been both elegant and terrifying. Kane's engineers had developed a new kind of stealth protocol that allowed ships to maintain full combat readiness while mimicking the energy signatures of dead hulks. His crews had rehearsed the synchronized restart procedure until they could execute it with mechanical precision. The entire operation had been planned and practiced for months before implementation. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora had stared at the tactical analysis for hours, trying to comprehend the level of preparation and innovation Kane's strategy required. He planned this specific scenario months in advance? How could he know the rebels would respond exactly as they did? Because he understands psychology better than we understand technology, Intelligence Director Yex Kane had replied quietly. Kane does not just study military tactics. He studies how different species think, how they react under pressure, what assumptions they make when presented with specific situations. He builds psychological profiles of entire civilizations and then exploits their predictable responses. The siege of New Geneva had proven that point beyond any doubt. A coalition of 3 alien species had attempted to claim the human colony world, arguing that humans were too primitive to properly utilize such valuable real estate. They had surrounded the planet with overwhelming force and demanded immediate surrender. Kane had responded by doing absolutely nothing. For 6 weeks, his fleet had remained in orbit around New Geneva, making no aggressive moves, sending no threats, taking no action whatsoever. The alien coalition had grown increasingly frustrated, demanding responses that never came, issuing ultimatums that were completely ignored. Finally, the coalition commanders had decided to demonstrate their superior firepower by destroying one of New Geneva's moons. It was meant to be a show of force, a clear message that resistance was futile. The moment their weapons had locked onto the moon, Kane had struck, not at their ships but at their supply lines. While the coalition had been focused on the siege, Kane had dispatched smaller human fleets to systematically destroy every logistics vessel, refueling station, and supply depot within 50 light years of New Geneva. By the time the coalition realized what was happening, they were stranded in space with no fuel, no supplies, and no way to retreat. Kane had not fired a single shot at their main fleet. He had simply cut their lifelines and waited for basic physics to do the rest. Starvation warfare, Defense Minister Lothar had wheezed through his breathing apparatus. He turned our own siege tactics against us. While we were threatening his planet, he was destroying our ability to maintain the siege. The coalition had surrendered within days, their mighty fleets reduced to helpless collections of metal drifting in space. Kane had graciously provided them with just enough fuel to reach the nearest neutral port, along with a polite suggestion that they reconsider their territorial ambitions. It was after New Geneva that the alien military establishment had begun using a new term in their reports about Kane, asymmetric nightmare. General Morquez had attempted to create a comprehensive analysis of Kane's tactical philosophy, but the resulting document had read more like a psychological profile than a military assessment. Kane does not fight battles, he had concluded. He creates situations where victory becomes inevitable through superior preparation and enemy psychology manipulation. He wins wars before the shooting starts. The final confirmation of Kane's ascension had come during the Human Defense Council meeting that elevated him to Fleet Admiral. Alien intelligence had managed to intercept fragments of the human leadership discussion, and the quotes had chilled every military observer in the galaxy. Kane has never lost an engagement. 0 casualties under his command in 3 years. Strategic innovation that borders on prescience. Tactical flexibility that adapts to any situation. Psychological warfare capabilities that break enemy morale before combat begins. The Human Defense Secretary's final statement had been the most terrifying. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not just promoting Marcus Kane. We are weaponizing him. As of today, he commands every human military asset in known space. God help anyone who stands in his way. Admiral Zul Nex had dimmed to almost nothing when that intelligence reached the high command. The human they had rejected as expendable waste now controlled the most rapidly advancing military force in the galaxy. The maverick who showed dangerous levels of independent thinking was now free to think as independently as he wanted, with an entire species' military might at his disposal. War Chief Beck's goal had summed up their situation with characteristic bluntness. We did not just miss identifying a talented commander. We created our own worst enemy and then handed him the tools to destroy us. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora had been forced to agree. Marcus Kane was no longer just a human problem. He was everyone's problem. And it was entirely their fault. What followed Kane's promotion to Fleet Admiral could only be described as systematic annihilation wrapped in a bow of psychological torment. The human had not merely begun attacking alien territories. No, that would have been too simple, too predictable. Instead, Kane had launched what military historians would later call the Campaign of Broken Minds, a 6-month reign of terror that left the galaxy's most powerful civilizations questioning their own sanity. But the hegemony had been first to experience Kane's new approach to warfare. Their fortress world of 6 Primal had been considered absolutely impregnable for over 2,000 years. Massive orbital defense platforms, planetary shield generators, underground bunker networks that could withstand direct bombardment from capital ships. The Hegemony High Command had been so confident in their defenses that they had publicly dared Kane to attack. He had accepted their invitation with characteristic enthusiasm, but Kane had not attacked 6 Primal. Instead, he had done something far worse. He had ignored it completely. His fleet had bypassed the fortress world entirely and systematically destroyed every single supply depot, refinery, and manufacturing facility in the surrounding 12 systems. Within 3 weeks, 6 Primal had found itself the proud owner of perfect defenses protecting absolutely nothing of value. He turned our greatest strength into our greatest weakness. General Torvex had reported to the Emergency Hegemony Council, of his normally confident voice shaking with barely controlled rage. 6 Primal is now a monument to our stupidity. We spent centuries building the perfect fortress to protect assets that no longer exist. But Kane had not stopped there. Oh no, that would have been merciful. Instead, he had begun broadcasting daily messages to the stranded garrison on 6 Primal. Not threats or demands for surrender. Weather reports. Good morning, defenders of 6 Primal. Kane's voice had echoed across the fortress world every day at precisely 0800 hours. Today's forecast calls for continued isolation with a high probability of irrelevance. Tomorrow looks much the same. In fact, our long-range models suggest you will remain completely meaningless for the foreseeable future. Have a pleasant day. The psychological impact had been devastating. The proud warriors of 6 Primal had found themselves defending nothing from nobody, while listening to humanity's greatest military mind deliver weather forecasts with the casual indifference of someone discussing lunch plans. Within 2 months, the garrison's morale had collapsed so completely that they had begun requesting transfer to active combat zones just to escape the humiliation. The insectoid collective had believed they could do better. Their hive-mind coordination gave them tactical advantages that individual consciousness could never match. Thousands of ships moving with perfect synchronization, responding to threats with collective precision that eliminated confusion and hesitation. Kane had studied their coordination protocols for exactly 1 week before launching his counterstrike. The Battle of Kepler Nebula had lasted 4 hours and redefined the very concept of tactical brilliance. Instead of fighting the collective's coordinated swarms, Kane had done something that defied all logical military thinking. He had surrendered his command ship, Admiral Kane, to collective swarm leader. He had broadcast as his flagship drifted powerless toward the enemy formation. My vessel has suffered catastrophic engine failure. I am surrendering my command ship and requesting safe passage for my crew. The collective, programmed to accept surrenders efficiently and process prisoners according to galactic military law, had moved to secure Kane's flagship. 300 insectoid vessels had surrounded the human command ship, their tractor beams locking on to guide it toward the processing center. What the collective had not realized was that Kane's disabled flagship was actually a massive signal amplifier disguised as a surrendering vessel. The moment it reached the center of their formation, Kane had activated a feedback loop that turned the collective's own coordination network against itself. The hive mind, suddenly receiving contradictory signals from its own communication system, had begun issuing conflicting orders to different sections of the fleet. Ships that should have been advancing found themselves retreating. Vessels ordered to fire discovered their targeting systems had been reset to friendly units. The perfect coordination that made the collective so dangerous became a nightmare of friendly fire and operational chaos. Kane's remaining ships had emerged from the nebula like ghosts, picking off confused and isolated insectoid vessels while their crews struggled to understand why their own network was trying to kill them. By the end of the engagement, the collective had lost over 600 ships to their own weapons, while Kane's forces had barely fired a shot. He weaponized our greatest strength. Hive Commander Rick Thala had reported in what could only be described as electronic bewilderment. The network that makes us unbeatable in coordination became the instrument of our destruction. How does one defend against an enemy who turns your advantages into liabilities? Supreme Admiral Vex Thora had been asking herself the same question as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Kane was not just winning battles. He was rewriting the fundamental rules of military engagement, turning every established tactical doctrine into a weapon against its practitioners. The Silicon Confederacy had learned this lesson during the siege of Alpha Orbital. Their mathematical precision in fleet movements had been legendary for millennia. Every ship positioned with geometric perfection, every maneuver calculated to mathematical certainty, every formation optimized for maximum defensive efficiency. Kane had taken one look at their perfect mathematical formations and done something that violated every principle of space combat. He had attacked with random patterns, calculated randomness, or strategic unpredictability. Actual, genuine, coin-flipping randomness. His ships had moved in patterns generated by quantum uncertainty, their positions determined by probability rather than strategy. The Silicon Confederacy's perfect mathematical responses had been designed to counter logical tactical thinking, not chaos theory in action. Impossible to counter random inputs. Silicon Fleet Mind Designation 7742 had reported in algorithmic confusion. Probability calculations return error messages when enemy behavior lacks mathematical foundation. He cannot compute defensive responses to actions that have no strategic purpose. Kane's random pattern ships had wandered through the Confederacy's perfect formations like drunk tourists stumbling through a military parade. The Silicon vessels, unable to predict or counter movements that had no logical basis, had found themselves constantly out of position and unable to establish effective firing solutions. The engagement had ended when Kane's ships, still moving in completely random patterns, had accidentally surrounded the Confederacy command vessel and inadvertently forced its surrender through pure statistical chance. But perhaps the most terrifying demonstration of Kane's psychological warfare had been the Phantom Fleet incident. Intelligence reports had reached the Aquatic Union that Kane was massing 1,000 ships for an assault on their home system. Long-range sensors had confirmed the presence of massive human formations moving toward Union space. The Aquatic Defense Force had mobilized every available vessel, calling in ships from 12 systems to repel the expected invasion. For 2 weeks, they had maintained perfect defensive positions, waiting for Kane's attack while their finest admirals analyzed the approaching human fleet. The attack had never come, because there was no fleet. Kane had used holographic projectors and sensor ghosts to create the illusion of a massive armada. The Union had mobilized their entire military to defend against shadows and light shows, while Kane's actual forces had quietly seized 7 lightly defended systems on the opposite side of Union space. "We deployed our entire fleet to fight an enemy that did not exist," Admiral Depth Singer Kex Coral had reported, her voice filled with the kind of humiliation that would haunt Union military culture for generations. While we prepared for a phantom invasion, Kane conquered 1/3 of our territory with forces we never detected. By the end of 6 months, Kane's name had become a whisper of terror across the galaxy. Military commanders had begun suffering nervous breakdowns at the mere mention of human fleet movements. Battle-hardened veterans had requested transfers to peaceful civilian posts rather than risk facing Kane in combat. War Chief Bex Goal had summed up the situation with brutal honesty during an emergency high command session. "Kane is not fighting a war. He is conducting a masterclass in psychological torture, and we are his unwilling students. Every engagement teaches us a new way to be defeated by our own assumptions. Intelligence Director Yex Kane had pulled up casualty reports from Kane's terror campaign, and the numbers had told a story that chilled every observer to their core. Human losses, negligible. Alien losses, catastrophic. But the most terrifying statistic had been the one no one wanted to discuss. Morale casualties, incalculable. Kane had not just defeated alien fleets. He had broken the will of entire civilizations to resist. The human reject they had dismissed as expendable waste had become the galaxy's most feared predator, and he was just getting started. The klaxons had fallen silent, but the dread in the high command chamber had only grown thicker. Outside the massive viewports, Kane's fleet hung in space like a collection of mechanical death sentences. 200 human warships arranged in formations that somehow managed to look both beautiful and terrifying. No aggressive posturing, no threatening maneuvers. They simply waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora stared at the tactical display showing their current situation and felt something she had never experienced before: complete, absolute helplessness. The combined fleets of all 12 species had been reduced to 43 functional vessels. Kane commanded 200 of the most advanced warships ever constructed, crewed by humans who had learned to fight under the galaxy's most innovative military mind. "He is requesting communication," General Krexvor announced, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled panic. "Priority channel, full diplomatic protocols." "Put him through," Vex Thora replied, though the words felt like swallowing poison. The holographic display shimmered, and Marcus Kane appeared before them. 3 years of commanding humanity's military had changed him. The unremarkable human who had stood in this same chamber during his humiliating rejection now carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. His dark eyes swept the assembled council with the same mild curiosity he had shown during his interview, but now that curiosity felt like being examined by a scientist studying particularly interesting specimens. "Supreme Admiral Vex Thora," Kane said, his voice carrying the same steady, unremarkable tone they remembered. "Ladies and gentlemen of the High Command, thank you for accepting my communication request." Defense Minister Lochthar's breathing apparatus wheezed loudly as he leaned forward. "Admiral Kane, surely we can discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Kane's expression did not change. "Minister Lochthar, you seem to be under the impression that we are in conflict. I prefer to think of this as a performance evaluation. You see, 3 years ago, this council evaluated my military capabilities and found them insufficient for service in your forces. Today, I am here to return the favor." War Chief Bex Goal slammed his massive fist on the table. "You dare mock the Galactic High Command? We are the greatest military minds in known space." "Are you?" Kane asked with genuine curiosity. "Because from where I sit, you appear to be 12 individuals who just lost an entire galaxy to someone you deemed militarily incompetent. I have to wonder what that says about your evaluation criteria." Intelligence Director Yex Kane's multiple arms gestured frantically. "Admiral Kane, perhaps we can reach an understanding. The galaxy has room for multiple powers. Surely human interests and galactic stability can coexist." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "An interesting proposal, Director. But I have already reached an understanding. You see, 3 years ago you had the opportunity to work with me. You chose instead to label me expendable waste and send me home. Now the power dynamic has shifted somewhat, and I find myself in a position to make choices about your future." Admiral Zul Nex's crystalline form flickered with desperate hope. "What terms are you proposing?" "Terms?" Kane actually smiled, and somehow that smile was more terrifying than any threat could have been. "Oh, I am not proposing anything. I am simply implementing the galactic reorganization that your collective wisdom has made inevitable." General Morkes leaned forward, his metallic voice dropping to a whisper. "What reorganization?" Kane gestured, and the holographic display changed to show a new galactic map. Human territories now encompassed over 60% of known space, with the remaining alien civilizations relegated to carefully defined sectors. Effective immediately, The Galactic High Command is dissolved, Kane announced with the casual indifference of someone discussing weather forecasts. Military authority for all spacefaring civilizations now falls under the jurisdiction of the Human Defense Coordination Council. Think of it as a comprehensive quality assurance program. The chamber erupted in outraged protests, but Kane continued speaking as if he had not heard them. Each member species will be assigned human military advisors to help improve their tactical doctrine. All major military operations must receive approval from human command before implementation, and all future military recruitment will be subject to human evaluation standards. He paused, his smile widening slightly. We would not want anyone else to make the same evaluation errors you made with me. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. And if we refuse these terms? Kane looked genuinely surprised by the question. Refuse? Oh, I think you misunderstand the nature of our discussion. These are not terms being offered for negotiation. This is simply me informing you of decisions that have already been implemented. Your fleets have been neutralized, your home worlds are under human protection, and your military infrastructure is now managed by human personnel. The reality of their situation finally sank in completely. They were not negotiating surrender. They had already surrendered. Kane was simply being polite enough to explain their new circumstances rather than leaving them to figure it out themselves. War Chief Bex Gull's voice came out as a strangled whisper. You have conquered the entire galaxy. Conquered? Kane shook his head. No, that would imply you put up meaningful resistance. What I have done is accept responsibility for galactic military coordination after the previous management proved inadequate. Intelligence Director Yax Kane stared at Kane with something approaching awe. 3 years ago, we rejected you as militarily incompetent. You did indeed, Kane agreed cheerfully. And in doing so, you taught me something very important about evaluation standards. You taught me that sometimes the biggest threat to a system is the person that system refuses to acknowledge. I have spent the last 3 years demonstrating the practical applications of that lesson. The Defense Minister Lopthar's breathing apparatus was working overtime. What happens to us now? Kane's expression became almost kindly. You continue serving in your current positions with the understanding that your decisions are now subject to human oversight. Think of it as an extended learning opportunity. Who knows? With proper guidance, you might eventually develop the military competence I was supposedly lacking. The irony was so perfect, so absolutely devastating, that several council members actually began laughing. It's not from humor, but from the kind of hysteria that comes from realizing the magnitude of one's own mistakes. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora looked at Kane's image and finally asked the question that had been haunting her for months. How long have you been planning this? Kane's smile became almost gentle. Since the moment I walked out of this chamber 3 years ago, and you began celebrating your wise decision to reject the dangerous maverick. You see, you were absolutely correct about one thing. I am dangerous. I do think independently. I do disregard conventional wisdom. The mistake you made was assuming those were weaknesses rather than advantages. The communication ended, leaving the council staring at empty air while Kane's fleet continued its patient vigil outside. The human they had dismissed as expendable waste now controlled their fate, their fleets, and their future. The galaxy had a new order, and Marcus Kane was its architect. 6 months later, Supreme Admiral Vex Thora sat in the same chamber where she had once dismissed Marcus Kane as expendable waste. The room looked identical, but everything else had changed in ways that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The obsidian table still gleamed under the same lights, but now it bore a new emblem, the insignia of the Human Defense Coordination Council. She was no longer Supreme Admiral of anything. Her new title, assigned with Kane's characteristic attention to ironic detail, was Senior Advisor for Historical Military Analysis. Her job, as Kane had explained with that same mild courtesy that had become his trademark, was to study past alien military failures and help develop training programs to prevent future incompetence. The bitter irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. The 12 most powerful military minds in the galaxy had become students in a classroom taught by the human they had collectively rejected as unfit for basic service. General Krexvor, now designated Assistant Coordinator for Tactical Doctrine Review, clicked his mandibles nervously as he reviewed the latest reports from across the galaxy. Under Kane's reorganization, galactic military efficiency had increased by 400%. Conflicts that had previously dragged on for years were now resolved in weeks. Piracy had been virtually eliminated. Trade route security was at historic highs. "The numbers are undeniable," he muttered, though admitting success felt like swallowing glass. "Kane's system works better than anything we ever implemented." Admiral Zul Nex, whose new role as specialist in mathematical combat assessment had proven surprisingly fulfilling, pulsed with reluctant admiration. "His human advisors are teaching our fleet's tactics we never considered. The hegemony's Third Fleet just achieved a perfect victory against separatist rebels using strategies that Kane pioneered during his rejection tour." War Chief Bexgol had been assigned the title Director of Conventional Warfare Limitations, which he suspected was Kane's way of acknowledging that conventional warfare was exactly what he specialized in. "My people are learning to think beyond brute force," he admitted grudgingly. "The human instructors are showing us tactical flexibility we never knew existed." "It is effective." Defense Minister Lok Thar wheezed through his breathing apparatus as he compiled casualty reports. As coordinator for combat efficiency analysis, his job was to track the military improvements across all species. The data told a story that none of them wanted to acknowledge but could not deny. Under Kane's leadership, galactic military casualties had dropped to the lowest levels in recorded history. Not because there was less conflict, but because conflicts were being resolved with surgical precision rather than overwhelming force. Species that had been locked in centuries-old territorial disputes were finding peaceful solutions through Kane's mediation programs. Intelligence Director Yex Kane, now serving as Chief Analyst for Strategic Innovation Research, had spent months studying Kane's methods. Her reports painted a picture of military genius that made their original evaluation look even more ridiculous in hindsight. "Kane does not just win battles," she had written in her latest assessment. "He creates conditions where battles become unnecessary." His psychological warfare programs have reduced armed conflicts by 60% simply by convincing potential aggressors that victory is impossible. He has weaponized the concept of inevitability. The most galling aspect of their new reality was how much better everything worked under Kane's system. The galactic economy was more stable, trade was more secure, and interspecies relations had improved dramatically. It turned out that having a military genius in charge of galactic security was actually beneficial for everyone involved. General Morquez, whose new position as evaluator of traditional combat limitations required him to catalog the weaknesses in conventional military thinking, and reached a conclusion that haunted him daily. Kane was right about everything, he had reported to the Council. Independent thinking, tactical flexibility, psychological understanding, adaptive strategy. Every quality we dismissed as a liability has proven essential for effective military leadership. The most painful meetings were the weekly briefings where Kane himself would appear via hologram to discuss galactic security issues. He remained as courteous and professional as ever, treating them with the same respectful attention he might give to any experienced consultants. He never gloated, never reminded them of their error, never showed anything but sincere appreciation for their continued service, which somehow made it worse. "Your analysis of the Outer Rim situation has been invaluable," Kane had told them during the previous week's briefing. "Your historical perspective helps us avoid repeating past mistakes. I truly appreciate your willingness to share your expertise." The human they had labeled militarily incompetent was now thanking them for their expertise while running the most successful military organization in galactic history. Supreme Admiral Vex Thora often found herself staring at Kane's original evaluation file, still sealed in the archives with its damning conclusion, "Rejected all species. Classification, expendable waste. Military value negligible." She had begun keeping a personal journal documenting their monumental failure for future historians. Her latest entry had been particularly honest. Today marks 6 months under human military coordination. Galactic security is at unprecedented levels. Economic stability has improved across all sectors. Interspecies cooperation has reached historic highs. The human we unanimously rejected as expendable waste has created the most effective military and political system in recorded history. We did not just misidentifying a competent officer. We failed to recognize the most talented military mind our galaxy has ever produced. Marcus Kane was never the problem. We were. Our arrogance, our rigid thinking, our inability to see value in approaches that differed from our established doctrine. We created our own downfall through the simple act of being wrong about everything that mattered. The galaxy is better off under Kane's leadership than it ever was under ours. That may be the most painful truth of all. Outside her window, human ships patrolled the space lanes with quiet efficiency, maintaining peace through the simple expedient of superior competence. The expendable waste had become indispensable, and the galaxy's former masters had become footnotes in the story of their own replacement. Marcus Kane had achieved the ultimate victory. He had made himself necessary and them obsolete, all while maintaining the polite fiction that they still mattered. The reject had become the ruler, and everyone knew he deserved it.